In Luke chapter 9, one of the most interesting instances in the Bible takes place. Let's read it together. Look at this. It says, "And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was transformed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly, two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared and began talking with Jesus. They were glorious to see, and they were speaking about his exodus from this world, which was about to be fulfilled in Jerusalem. Peter and the others had fallen asleep. When they woke, they saw Jesus' glory and the two men standing with him. As Moses and Elijah were starting to leave, Peter, not even knowing what he was saying, blurted out, 'Master, it's wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah.'" But listen to this part in verse 34. "But even as he was saying this, a cloud overshadowed them, and terror gripped them as the cloud covered them. Then a voice from the cloud said, 'This is my Son, my chosen one. Listen to him.' When the voice finished, Jesus was there alone. They didn't tell anyone what they had seen." This is an interesting exchange that takes place. Jesus is praying with the disciples, and as they're praying together, Jesus is transfigured. He transforms. His glory begins to seep through his human exterior, and the disciples begin to see him in his fullness as God. Not only that, 2 men appear, Elijah and Moses. Moses represents the law and the sacrificial system. This makes perfect sense because Moses wrote the law. He literally penned it. Elijah represented the prophets. So in the Old Testament, you have the law, which is Moses, and the Exodus, which is Moses, and a friend of God, which is Moses. But then you also have Elijah, who represents the major and the minor prophets. All of their messages were speaking of a day that would come, a time in the future where a Savior would come. When you read Isaiah 53 and you see the crucifixion in plain English, you're like, that was hundreds of years before Jesus. And yet Isaiah is able to depict the crucifixion because God knew he would send a Savior to save the world. And Elijah is the prophet who speaks for all prophets in acknowledging that Jesus is the Savior that was said to come. Now what's interesting is when Peter jumps up, Peter says, "Hey, look, it's awesome that we're all here together. This is really cool. You're in your glory, and this is how it's supposed to be. Why don't we build 3 shelters? One for Elijah, one for Moses, and one for you, Jesus." And in this statement, Peter puts Jesus on the same playing field as Moses and Elijah, essentially calling all 3 of them equal. And at that moment, a cloud falls from heaven and covers them, and it says, "Terror gripped them." What is this? This is God the Father coming down and making sure that everyone understands that Jesus is not on the same playing field as the law. He's not on the same playing field as the prophets or anyone else who had come before. The heroes of the Bible are a pedestal down, or many pedestals down, from Jesus Christ. He is the end all be all. He is the one. This weekend at That Church, we are kicking off a series called Elijah, where we are going to study the life of this incredible prophet, a prophet that in fact is selected by God to represent all prophets of the Bible in the New Testament. Super interesting character. You're not going to want to miss this series. Invite somebody today. Get to a That Church location this weekend because you're going to want to hear what we have to say about Elijah. Thanks, guys. I'll see you Sunday.